just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Great to have you guys here today, and we're gonna talk about something that is kind of pretty much where we all live. You know, my former pastor and still a good friend at the Met Church in Fort Worth. He liked to say, you know, if you're not coming out of a storm, you're either in a storm or you're going into a storm. It's just kind of the way life tends to be. And I personally am at a great point in my life. I mean, there are no big crises going on. And really, that's the best time to kind of prepare yourself, to prepare your heart, to gain some knowledge. Because when you get in those rough times, it's almost like literally being in a storm on a sailboat. You'll get that reference in a minute. And knowing that you have the reflexes to handle things properly. And you do that by training in the peaceful times. So we're going to talk about that. I don't know where you're at today, whether you're coming out of a storm, you're in the middle of a storm, or maybe in a peaceful time like me. But this is something that will really prepare you wherever you're at. And if you're in the middle of it, really give you some hope and encouragement. Our guest today is the author of several books, which is an interesting story in of itself. But the latest one is called Keeping Hope Alive, and it's a devotional. And I took the title of this little interview right from the subtitle because it's Devotions for Strength in the Storm. And so I'm excited to have Grace Fox on the program. If you're watching live, hello, Judy. I hope you're doing well, fellow Canadian. Not from me. Our guest is from Canada as well. But if you're watching and you know someone that's having a difficult time, you might need to share and just maybe give them a little encouragement, because today you will be encouraged and equipped. Grace, it's wonderful to have you on Life Today Live. I appreciate you being with us today.
I'm really glad for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Let's start kind of with this book. And I know you have other devotionals similar to this as well. This is a topic that God has kind of called you to address. I'm curious where that comes from.
The whole idea of hope. It's pretty fascinating, actually, how this series of 3 books like this came about. I attended a writers' conference in 2018, and I actually presented my first book of the 3 as an idea there. Several editors liked it, but in the end, it just never went anywhere. So I shelved it, and I thought, I'll just get back to it. I need to tweak the title, and I'll get back to it when I have time. So my husband and I are involved in international missions, and I did more international travel and didn't have time until like January of 2020. I went away to a retreat for writers, and during that retreat, sat with a friend who told me about a storm that she had gone through a couple months prior. And during that conversation, a title just sort of downloaded into my head. And I thought, that's the title of that proposal that I submitted and shelved. The title was Finding Hope in Crisis, Devotions for Calm and Chaos. It just came. And so I chatted with my agent after that and tweaked the proposal a bit. And he sent it out again. And it landed on the desk of an editor who said she'd had a similar project in the pipeline, but it had just fallen through and she was looking for a substitute. Well, that landed on her desk at just the right time. They signed me gave me a contract for it. I wrote it that summer and it came out by December. Everything was fast tracked. But who would have known that from the time that title came into my head to the time the book came out, we would be in the throes of the 2020 pandemic and people were running out of hope by December. Yeah. And this book that we're talking about today, the Keeping Hope Alive, I would have thought that by now we'd be well beyond it, but the stuff just keeps happening. And we really do need to keep hope alive, because when we look at the news headlines now, they look pretty grim. And the third one will be out in the fall, and that one's called Fresh Hope for Today, Devotions for Joy on the Journey. But I think hope is something that we all desperately want at this time, and we need to know how to keep it alive.
No doubt. And, COVID was obviously kind of the big global thing. But the reality is we all have issues going on, whether it's, illness, disappointment with people, friction in relationships, even losing loved ones. I mean, hope is the cure, not the cure. It's the thing that gets us through, I think, so much of life. We all need it. Why did you even want to write on this topic? There had to be something that made you think this is what I think people need to hear.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was a case of having been in tough situations where I realized that I needed to understand who God was. I needed to understand his character, and I needed to have spiritual encouragement in those dark places. So these books I wrote very short. Each daily meditation is very short, because I think that when we get into those places that are so hard, those storms that blow, sometimes we don't have time or the mental capacity or emotional wherewithal to sit and read and study the Word of God. Like you mentioned, being in places that are good, where the storms aren't blowing, and those are the places where we have the time and the capacity to read and study and research and learn and grow. But when we're in those storms, sometimes it's all we can do to hang on for dear life. We need the encouragement, but it's hard to focus. And so that's why they're short. But I learned that I guess I would call it an experience that totally changed my life. I was a young mom in my early 20s. My husband and I were missionaries in Nepal at the time. We'd had our first child born there, and then our second child was born, but she was born with medical issues, and the biggest one being a condition called hydrocephalus, and that's too much water on the brain. So she needed surgery to insert a shunt into her head to drain the excess fluid off. And she had other issues wrong. They couldn't even determine everything because they didn't have the medical equipment out there to do it. But doctors said, you need to get back to North America, like for her life's sake. And so we had 3 days before the next international flight. My husband went to get tickets through a phone call to Kathmandu to get us those tickets. And when the international airline found out that I had a cesarean section to deliver her because of the size of her head, they said, your wife's not coming on board because she's a medical high risk, and we don't want an infant less than 2 weeks old on board either. But we knew that unless she got on board, she would probably die. And at that point, then she was born on a Tuesday. Wednesday was when we found out the issues with the airline, and the flight was going to be Friday. So on the Thursday, we had this 12-hour journey by Land Rover back to the big city of Kathmandu. And I ended up having to stay behind for about a week or 8 days until the airline would let me fly. My husband wrapped the baby in a blanket. We gave him a bottle of express breast milk, and he threw a diaper bag over his shoulder, and he went with that baby back to North America. And I had to say goodbye. I didn't know whether I'd see my child alive again or not. But it was into that moment where I remember saying goodbye to my baby and then crying out to the Lord and saying, what is it that you want me to learn in this? I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. But what do you want me to learn? And he spoke to me through the lyrics of the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And I realized faithfulness didn't mean she would live and have this great quality of life. It meant that he would be with us no matter what happened, no matter what the future held for our child. And so I hung on to that. But wow, I think that gave me a heart for people going through those storms where 1 minute life's just fine and the next minute everything is upside down and you don't know which way you're going to come out of this thing or how it's going to look when it ends. And I've just got a heart for people in those situations.
What happened with her?
Yeah, so I got back a week later. She had already had surgery to put a shunt in her head. I remember sitting in the NICU ward and a doctor telling me, your daughter will die of congestive heart failure. She's just not strong enough to eat well, to get big enough to have open heart surgery to fix the problem that she has with her heart. But, she had probably 11 or 12 surgeries within the first 2 years of her life. But she still has a shunt in her head. She's in her 30s now. Wow. And she does have some challenges, like neurological challenges, but she's married. She's actually a financial coach for people struggling with credit debt. And she's brilliant. She's doing very well. like I say, but with a couple of neurological issues. But she loves the Lord, and she's graduated from Bible college, married 15 years, and God has a plan for her life. She's a miracle. She's a walking miracle.
Yeah, no doubt. Did you wrestle with God at all in those 8 days where you're stuck in Kathmandu, your husband's gone back to, I guess, Canada or the U.S., one of the two, and you don't know if you're going to see your daughter again? I mean, those are the times. I mean, you're in the mission field too. You're serving God. You know, I think it's natural to kind of go, God, what are you doing? Why would you put us through this? What's going on? Did you ask any of those questions?
You know, I asked those questions about 20 months, not even. So it would have been about 8 months prior. I had been through all that because our first child, the week of his first birthday, he got sick, really sick, and just about died. Well, I remember at that time trying to get to the mission hospital with this child whose eyes weren't even dilating anymore. He was laying in my arms, and we were in a van that had a broken transmission. We knew the friends of ours working with my husband had started this vehicle to get us going. And we knew that if that van stopped en route to the hospital, we wouldn't be able to get it going again. And so it was like, God, keep the roads open and don't let any buses come from the front. Don't let there be any landslides, especially with a bus coming from the front, because we will have to stop so the bus can have the right of way. And, you know, it was just crying that out all the way. It was about 11 miles as a crow flies, but a 2-hour ride by bus because the roads were so windy. And during that time, I had that wrestling with God, where I remember saying, we gave up everything for you to serve you and to be out here, and this is what we get? Come on. You know, that's what I was saying. And I remember him speaking to me in that moment and saying, Grace, I gave up my only son for you to have life. I know what it feels like to give up a child. I know that. And I remember my heart just being, really challenged at that moment. And I thought of a quote by Jim Elliot, I believe, and it was, if Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice I make can be too great for him. And that silenced that wrestling during that moment. So when I was in that very similar place with my second child a year later, I remember going back to that. If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice I make can be too great for him. And hanging on to that. But I also remember a poster that I loved when I was a teenage girl, and it was a kitten. There was a rope coming down from the ceiling with a knot tied at the end, with this little kitten at the bottom with his claws, in the knot. And that kitten was hanging on to that knot for all it was worth. And it said, when all else fails, tie a knot and hang on. And that's how I felt too. I felt like, wow, everything I may have counted on in my life was gone. Like nothing was going to get me through this as a mom separated from her newborn, not knowing if I'd see her alive again or not. Nothing was going to get me through that situation except my understanding of who God was and his faithfulness. That was the only thing. Yeah. And that's what it is.
Reminds me of the passage in James, the very counterintuitive passage in James. It says, consider it all joy, my brothers, when you face these various trials, knowing that it produces endurance. He's talking about God allowing or using. I'm not quite sure which is the really correct theological view. I don't think God causes bad things to happen, but does he allow it or does he just use it in this fallen world? Either way, if we let him, he will refine us through that to make us more like him. And if that's the ultimate goal of this life, and really the only ultimate purpose of this life is to conform to the image of Christ, then you can see, okay, I mean, we don't like these things. And your stories turned out, for the good. But you've been around the world enough and you've known enough people. Some of them end horribly and tragically and painfully. How do we handle these trials and keep our eyes on that prize of conformity to Christ, because it's tough in the middle of the storm. It's really hard for people.
It is tough. And I think it's the thoughts that we think and where our focus lies those two things make all the difference in the world. And so if we entertain thoughts habitually, and I think that would be the key word, because we all have fleeting thoughts of fear or doubt, those will come. And if we let them sit and take up residence in our mind, we will end up going down the wrong path. And so we have to go back and say, what's the root of that thought? Where's that coming from? But then counteract it with the truth. Scripture talks about keeping our eyes focused on Jesus. And let me just give you a little analogy from the sailing life. So my husband and I live full-time on a sailboat. And I grew up on the plains of southern Alberta. So like, you're talking landlubber here, okay? But I married a guy from Washington State who grew up in a family that did boating as recreational pastimes. And then they moved and built a house on the waterfront. So this guy drove a boat when he was 6 years old for the first time. He built a little sailboat when he was in Eagle Scouts. We later went to Christian camping ministry, and he developed a sailing camp off the coast of British Columbia. So this guy knows the water. He understands tide charts. He understands the weather. And I didn't grow up with any of that. So way different perspective. And so when we go out on the water, if we get out into wind and waves, my natural tendency is to like hang on and scream for dear life, right? Just hang on. But my husband is totally comfortable at the helm. Now, he never does anything that's going to make me more afraid than I already feel. He is very cautious for me, and he looks out for me, and I can trust his heart on that. And he's just a very careful sailor, because stuff happens on the water very quickly, right? And so I have to always remember, look at my husband's face. I call him Sailor Man, right? So I can look at Sailor Man's face, and if he's not alarmed, then why should I be? If he's at the helm and he's looking completely calm and relaxed, I don't have any reason to fear. And so I just compare that to spiritual truths. Like, if I keep my eyes on Jesus and I look at his promises and I see the words over and over again, don't be afraid. Do not fear. I am with you. Do not be afraid. I am your God. I'm holding you. I've got you. I've got you in my right hand. Then I think if I keep my eyes there, I don't have any reason to be afraid. And then I go back to this. Jesus died for me. Do I have any reason to doubt his goodness? Do I have any reason to doubt what he's allowing to happen in my life at this time? And when I focus on his love, I have to respond, I have no reason to doubt.
Yeah. And I think that's the temptation, is we question God's goodness in those difficult moments. And we hear that voice that says, did God really say that? Yeah. Is that really what he meant when he said, he'd be with us, when he said he is good? Do we really believe it? Which is, that's all the way back to the garden kind of temptation to not believe. Here's a question for you. You're on the boat right now, yeah?
I am.
Well, the picture looks good because you're not like rocking back and forth or anything.
We're tied on pretty tight right now, and it is lovely calm outside today.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. But to use back to the sort of the analogy, so the first time you were out on the water, were you, especially when it got stormy, was that a frightening time for you?
It was, and I've been on much smaller boats. This boat is 48 feet long, but I've been on much smaller boats where it's even scarier because you really get tossed around. But let me tell you, when we think about how do you prepare for the storms, because they will come.
And that's where I was going, yeah.
Okay, so they will, it's not a matter of if, but when, and we can't predict them. We can't look at the calendar to say, okay, today's Wednesday. I know by Friday I'm going to be in the middle of it. So it doesn't happen that way. But we have to prepare. And so here, like the first time I went out in this one, I wasn't prepared. So we got out there into the open water, and the waves were coming and the wind was blowing, and we started rocking back and forth. And this is my house. And so like I have a crock pot sitting on my counter, and I've got a toaster. I've got, you see this little, on this side, these little flowers, behind me. Yeah. They're fake because I can't grow real things, but these things are heavy, almost like little concrete flower pots. And I thought they were going to stay put because they weigh a little bit, but they don't stay put when we really get rocking. And so anything that I hadn't put away or stored properly became like a projectile. Yeah. And on one occasion, I remember we have one little stand-up fridge, and the door flew open. Little individual yogurts came out. A little basket that I had with oranges and apples fell off the counter that it sits on, and we had fruit rolling across the salon. So now I know I have to prepare, because stuff's going to happen when we go out there and onto open water. I put everything away. I store it. I make sure the cabinets are locked shut. We have a file cabinet in our berth with all the files about the boat's history and the mechanics of it. We have a piece of wood that we actually put across that file cabinet, because the first time we went out, that cabinet came flying right out of the wall. And so, we prepare, and we must prepare for those storms of life by getting into the Word and being involved in a small group and memorizing the Word, hiding it in our hearts, and really learning about the character of God, because that's the truth that we can hold on to when those winds start to blow.
Yeah. Yeah. And, a lot of people feel like, especially the first time you hit something that you hadn't hit before, you feel like that the refrigerator of your life is open and all the contents have spilled all over the floor and everything's a mess. But once we learn to prepare, which is what you're doing, and I want to show people the book again, Keeping Hope Alive by Grace Fox, available now, as well as several other devotional types where you can prepare your heart. But when you do that, when you find yourself, now you guys, go by choice onto the water, not necessarily into the storm. Life doesn't give us a choice. We're thrown into the storm, like you said. But that preparation, you've had to prepare on the boat, but yet God has also prepared you in life to get through those difficult times. Contrast your state of mind, your emotional state, your spiritual state, when you go through things again, whether it's on the boat or it's in life, and you are prepared.
Yeah, I'm in a much better place.
Mm-hmm.
In a much better place. I think you referred earlier to that passage in James that talks about count it all joy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that now, as I've learned over years, 35 years since that life-changing moment, or 37 years actually, since that incident with our daughter at her birth, I've learned that it's my focus, where I put my focus. And if I want to let my thoughts habitually focus on the fear, I'm going to go down that path. If I focus habitually on the promises of God and his presence with me and his faithfulness to carry me through, I will experience peace. But there's other things, like Philippians talks about with everything. Don't be worried about anything, but pray about everything. And with thanksgiving, right? We're supposed to give thanks in the midst of those prayers. We can let our requests be made known to God, and the peace of God will guard our hearts and minds as we live in Christ Jesus. And I've learned to look at scriptures like that and then put into practice what they say. So for instance, when I'm in the storm, the fears will come, the uncertainties might come, but I'm going to use those now as triggers to pray. Rather than focusing on them, I will say, whoa, what am I hearing? Okay, I am fearful about what the outcome might be here. So I'm going to commit that to prayer right now and turn it into prayer. But then I'm going to thank God for his faithfulness in the past, just like throughout the Old Testament, where God said, remember what I've done. He said to the Israelites, remember how I gave you water in the wilderness and I gave you water from the rock. And remember how your sandals didn't wear out and your clothes didn't wear out for those 40 years. Remember my faithfulness. So I will give thanks to him for all those things that he's done in the past to prove his faithfulness to me. And then I know that when I pray, I refuse to worry, and I pray and I give thanks, then I will experience that peace. It's like a mathematical equation. I've got to have all those things on the left-hand side of the equal sign before I will experience that peace that's guaranteed on the right side of that equal sign.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like the training you would have for sailing, and that, you know, I sort of talked about this at the very beginning. You have this reflexive response to the storm, because when you're on the boat and all of a sudden weather's getting bad, okay, I got to go put that piece of wood in front of the filing cabinet and things like that. And when in life you hit these things and you feel that fear, if all you focus on, it will consume you, the situation, the circumstances. And if you don't know what to do, then you are in disarray. But when you prepare yourself through the experience and through the scripture and exactly what you're talking about here, you go, okay, these are the responses I should have in order to get me through this storm and to maintain as much peace as possible. And I love that you put that down on paper for other people to really get into their souls, to prepare them. It's like the training manual for sailing. You know, it's like, here's your checklist of things you got to do when you hit the bad weather. When you want to keep hope alive in people, you're saying, look, here are the things you do to prepare yourself for the storms that are coming to get you through them. Mm-hmm. What kind of responses are you seeing? Because I know, okay, so you've also got a podcast that you do, your daily Bible verse podcast, where you get into some detail into the scriptures to prepare people. What are you seeing when people learn to prepare for the storms and then they go through them? I mean, there's got to be a little bit of sense of accomplishment when people go, you helped prepare me and I got through this storm. Thank you for doing that. Do you hear any of that feedback on the podcast or through your books?
Mostly through my books and my blog. And I post helpful things on my Facebook page as well, which is just Grace Fox, Christian author speaker, Grace Fox /author. I hear stuff like that from people, and it just gives me a heart of gratitude. Yeah. Because then I think none of that stuff that I've gone through in the past, losing my mobility for 3 months several years ago and having to learn how to walk again, all that, losing my mom in the midst of the COVID chaos, all of that. You know, I think these things that God has entrusted me to go through are not lost. Yeah. And I just am so grateful for the way that he's revealed himself to me through the hardships, so that I can in turn pass on the things that I've learned and know that those words are bringing hope to others in the midst of hardship. It brings me, just a heart of gratitude. Yeah. Yeah.
Are they letting you out of Canada to speak again?
Yes. Okay. And I'm so grateful for that. I am grateful. I have a daughter. This daughter that I mentioned lives in the States. And so we went almost 2 years without seeing her. And I'm just so glad when the border reopened. But I'm grateful for those opportunities to teach the word in person again.
Now, are you doing those individually or with Proverbs 31 or both? Or what's on the calendar? Do you have anything scheduled for the rest of the summer?
Yeah, Proverbs 31, I'm one of their writing team members for First Five. Okay. And so doing Bible studies. So that's an online thing. But I do have a speaking engagement coming up at Sandy Cove Ministries in Maryland. Oh, wow. And that's going to be in September, the middle of September. They're having a women's retreat there, and they've asked me to come. I was there doing another retreat for First Place for Health Ministries in May. And then Sandy Cove, the ministry itself, asked me to come back for their women's retreat. And I think they're expecting about 300 women.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're able to get back out again. I know for speakers, no, you got the writing, so that's kept you busy. But man, for speakers, it's been a rough couple of years. So
it's been a rough ride. Yeah.
A rough ride, some stormy seas. If we're just going to stick with the analogy. Thank you, Grace. I appreciate your encouragement. Is there anything I've failed to ask, or anything you want to mention before I let you go?
I just want to say thank you for the ministry that you're doing, and just thank you to your audience for being a part of this conversation today. And I just want to say a blessing to your viewers. And I always, when I sign books or I sign off on my blog or whatever, I say, know you are loved. And that would be the message to the viewers today, is know you are loved.
That's good. And some thanks back to you from Jason, Judy, Carolyn, Linda, and some others that you've encouraged already today. And those are just the ones watching live. There's many more that will watch in the replay. So again, thank you, Grace Fox. Appreciate your encouragement, your wisdom from your the difficulties you've been through. I know we didn't even cover all of them. You touched on some at the end, but I'm like, man, are all your personal stories in the books, or is there one that's more sort of biographical?
I don't have a biographical one yet. They're just in little snippets throughout the devotional books. Yeah, I write for Guideposts too, and so I've been a contributor for their Mornings with Jesus 365-day devotional for 10 years. And so there's little snippets of my stories in there as well. Yeah. People say, you should write your life.
Yeah, one day. Yeah.
One day.
Yeah, it'll happen. You'll know God's timing. Well, that's very cool. Okay, well, I know people can reach you, all things Grace Fox, at gracefox.com, so feel free to do that. And check out her books. Good gift item for someone that you may know who may be going through a difficult time. Can't have too much hope in this world. We need it. Appreciate you guys out there watching. If you haven't subscribed, followed, liked, or shared, invite you to do that now. Check us out on all the different platforms. We're uploading to Rumble these days, so if you're a Rumbler, we're there as well. Light Source is always a great one, of course, here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And come back. We've got more great interviews here for you all this week, next week. All July is already booked, and we're booking August, and some exciting things I think are going to happen in August especially, so we'll see. But come back. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
If we have life, it is according to the mercy of God. If we have providence to guide us, it is God's mercy. The same for you, the same for every man, Jew and Gentile and Mohammedan, whether they believe it or not. We float on this vast, limitless sea of divine mercy.